Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now. The words cut through the low hum of the gas station like a switch being flipped, and everything seemed to pause for half a second. Even the flickering neon sign above pump number for that buzzed faintly in the damp night air. Naomi Carter didn't move right away, her hands still resting on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed but steady, as if she were holding on to something invisible rather than the worn leather beneath her palms. The dashboard clock read 9:17 p.m. A thin layer of rain had just passed through, leaving the pavement slick and reflective, mirroring the red and blue lights, now painting the concrete in restless streaks. She inhaled slowly, catching the faint smell of gasoline mixed with wet asphalt, a scent that always lingered at places like this, ordinary places that suddenly didn't feel ordinary at all. Outside her window, one officer stood slightly back, hand near his radio, while another leaned closer, posture firm, eyes scanning her like he had already decided who she was before she had a chance to say a word. A third cruiser idled behind them, engine low, headlights cutting long shadows across the pumps. Somewhere near the convenience store entrance, a man paused mid-step, phone halfway raised, uncertain whether to keep walking or stay and watch. Naomi blinked once, slowly, then turned her head just enough to meet the officer's gaze through the glass. She didn't look angry. She didn't look afraid. She looked present, as if she had stepped fully into the moment while everything around her struggled to keep up. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, measured, the kind of tone that didn't rise or fall but held steady, like a quiet line drawn in the middle of chaos. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. "We have a report of a stolen vehicle matching this plate. I need you to step out." The words came rehearsed, clean, but there was something underneath them. Something colder, something already decided. Naomi's eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror, catching the reflection of the flashing lights behind her, then back to him. "This car isn't stolen," she said gently, not defensive, not pleading, just stating a fact the way someone might comment on the weather. The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he tapped the side of the window with 2 fingers, a small, impatient motion that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet space. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Around them, the world seemed to tighten. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead grew sharper, the drip of water from the awning ticking against the ground like a slow metronome. Naomi exhaled again, longer this time, and for a brief moment, her gaze dropped to her hands, still resting exactly where they had been. She didn't grip the wheel. She didn't fidget. She just looked, as if reminding herself of something steady before letting go. Then, carefully, she reached for the door handle. The soft click of the lock disengaging sounded louder than it should have, followed by the creak of the door opening into the cool night air. She stepped out slowly, her sneakers touching the damp concrete, the chill rising faintly through the soles. The officer gestured slightly, guiding her a few feet away from the car. Another officer moved closer, positioning himself just behind her shoulder, not touching, but near enough that the space felt smaller. Naomi folded her hands loosely in front of her, posture straight, eyes forward. A car pulled into the far pump, then hesitated, the driver clearly unsure whether to continue or leave. The world kept moving, but softer now, like it was watching from a distance. "Do you have ID on you?" the first officer asked. Naomi nodded once. "In my purse. Front seat." He glanced toward the car, then back at her, weighing something. "We'll get that in a moment." A pause stretched between them, thin but noticeable. Naomi tilted her head just slightly, not enough to challenge, just enough to acknowledge the space. "You can run the plate again," she said quietly. "It's registered." The officer let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "We'll handle it." His radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, voices overlapping in clipped fragments that didn't quite form words. Naomi's eyes drifted for a second toward the convenience store windows, where bright white lights spilled out onto the pavement, illuminating shelves of snacks and drinks that felt strangely distant, like something from another world entirely. Then she looked back at the officer, steady again. "Okay," she said. Just one word. No resistance. No argument. But something in the way she said it didn't shrink. It didn't bend. It stayed exactly where it was, quiet and unshaken, like a line no one else could see, but everyone could feel. The officer's radio crackled again, sharper this time, A burst of static followed by a voice that was too fast to fully catch. And for a brief moment his attention shifted just enough for Naomi to notice the slight change in his posture, the almost imperceptible hesitation that passed across his face before he masked it with the same controlled firmness. Another patrol car rolled slowly past the edge of the lot, not stopping, just observing, its headlights sweeping across the scene like a quiet reminder that this moment had grown larger than it first appeared. Naomi stood where she had been positioned, feet planted evenly on the damp concrete, her hands still loosely folded in front of her, not rigid, not defensive, just steady, as if she understood that movement itself could be misread. The officer who had been standing behind her shifted his weight, the faint scrape of his boot against the ground cutting through the hum of the overhead lights. "Dispatch is confirming the report," the first officer said, though his tone carried less certainty than before. Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the silence sit between them, not heavy, not confrontational, just present, like a space waiting to be filled with something more accurate than assumptions. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, and a woman near the convenience store pulled her jacket tighter, whispering something to the man beside her as they both glanced over again, curiosity now edged with something closer to concern. Naomi turned her head slightly toward the officer, just enough to meet his eyes again. "You might want to double-check the VIN," she said quietly, her voice unchanged, calm and level, as if she were offering a suggestion rather than defending herself. The officer's brow tightened, not in anger, but in the discomfort of someone who did not like being redirected, especially not in front of others. "We are following procedure, ma'am," he replied, the words measured but clipped. Naomi nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not challenge him, but did not shrink either. The radio on his shoulder came alive again, louder now, the volume turned just high enough for fragments to spill into the open air. "Unit 12, confirm location, additional verification requested." The officer reached up and pressed the button, stepping half a pace away as he responded, his voice dropping slightly, more controlled, more cautious. Naomi's gaze drifted for a moment toward the reflection of the lights on the wet pavement, watching how the red and blue blurred together, indistinguishable at certain angles, then separated again when the surface shifted. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible for a second in the cool night before disappearing into the air. The second officer, the younger one, glanced at her, then at the car, then back at the first officer, as if weighing something he had not yet decided to say. His hand hovered near his belt, not tense, just uncertain. "Sir," he began quietly, leaning slightly toward his partner. The system might have flagged. The first officer cut him off with a subtle shake of his head, not aggressive, just final, a silent instruction to hold the line. The younger officer pressed his lips together and nodded, stepping back into place, though the hesitation did not fully leave his expression. Naomi noticed. She did not look directly at him, but the awareness was there, quiet and precise, like she was reading the room without needing to turn her head. "I am not going anywhere," she said softly, not to anyone in particular, just into the space, her words landing gently but clearly. The first officer finished speaking into the radio and lowered his hand, his jaw set, though his eyes flickered once more toward the car, then back to her. "We will sort this out," he said, but the statement felt less like control and more like a promise he was trying to convince himself of. A faint breeze moved through the lot, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic from the main road, tires passing over wet asphalt in a steady rhythm that contrasted with the stillness here. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, not stepping, just adjusting, the movement small but deliberate. Her sleeve brushed lightly against her wrist, and for a brief second, the edge of a simple watch caught the light, its face reflecting a sharp glint before settling back into shadow. The younger officer's eyes flicked to it, then away, as if the detail registered somewhere deeper than he could immediately explain. Another voice came through the radio, clearer this time, more direct, and the first officer's posture changed again, straighter, more alert. "Unit 12, stand by for updated information. Repeat, stand by." The words hung in the air, different from before, carrying a tone that suggested something had shifted beyond this small circle of flashing lights. Naomi lifted her gaze slightly, not toward the officers, but toward the dark stretch of road beyond the station. as if she could sense the change before it fully arrived. She did not smile. She did not react outwardly. But there was a quiet certainty in the way she stood, something unshaken, something that did not depend on what the next voice over the radio would say. And for the first time since the lights had come on, the officer hesitated not because he was unsure of her, but because he was beginning to wonder if he had been sure too soon. The silence that followed the radio call did not feel empty. It felt suspended, like something unseen had just entered the space and was waiting to reveal itself at the right moment. And the shift was subtle but undeniable, the kind that did not need to be announced to be felt by everyone standing under those humming lights. The first officer adjusted his stance again, his hand brushing briefly against the edge of his radio, as if to confirm it was still there, still connected, still feeding him information he could trust. But his eyes had changed, not dramatically, just enough that the certainty from earlier no longer sat as firmly behind them. Naomi remained where she was, shoulders relaxed, chin level, her breathing slow and even, as if the tension around her had not altered the rhythm inside her at all. A faint gust of wind moved across the lot, lifting the edge of her coat for a second before letting it fall back into place, and the sound of it brushing against the fabric seemed louder than it should have been, filling the quiet gap between words. The younger officer shifted again, this time stepping slightly closer to the patrol car, his gaze lingering on the license plate longer than before, as if he were replaying something in his mind, trying to match what he saw with what he had been told. "Sir," he said again, more carefully this time, keeping his voice low but steady. "The database sometimes flags duplicates when there is a federal registration." Overlap. The words hung there, more complete now, less tentative, and for a second, the older officer did not respond. Naomi did not look at either of them, but there was a faint awareness in the way her head tilted just slightly, as if she had heard not just the words, but the meaning behind them. The radio crackled again, louder, sharper, cutting through the air with a tone that demanded attention rather than requested it. "Unit 12, confirm you have the individual on site," the voice said, clearer now, slower, deliberate. The first officer pressed the button, his thumb firm against the device. "Affirmative," he replied, his voice measured, though a fraction tighter than before. "Individual is present and detained for verification." There was a pause, not static this time, but a clean, deliberate silence, as if whoever was on the other end was choosing their next words with care. Naomi's gaze lifted slightly again, her eyes settling somewhere beyond the immediate scene, past the flashing lights, past the parked cars, toward the dark stretch of road where nothing seemed to be happening, and yet something clearly was. The convenience store door opened with a soft chime, and a man stepped out holding a paper bag, only to stop short when he saw the scene, his expression shifting from casual to cautious in an instant, his footsteps slowing as he chose to stay near the doorway rather than walk through the center of it all. The air felt cooler now, or maybe it was just quieter, the kind of quiet that made every small sound stand out, the distant hum of tires on the highway, the faint drip of water from the edge of the canopy, the soft static whispering from the officer's radio, even when no one was speaking. Then the voice returned. "Unit 12, you are to stand by and maintain position. Additional authority has been notified." The phrasing was precise, official, but there was something else in it, something that did not belong to routine calls or ordinary stops. The first officer's jaw tightened again, but this time it was not with impatience, it was with something closer to recalculation. "Copy that," he said, though the words came a fraction slower than before. Naomi let out a quiet breath, almost unnoticeable, her shoulders rising and falling just slightly, and for the first time, she shifted her stance by a few inches, not stepping away, not stepping forward, just adjusting, as if preparing for something she had already accepted would come. The younger officer glanced at her again, then back at his partner, and this time he did not speak, but the question in his eyes was clear, even if unvoiced. The older officer did not meet that look. Instead, he kept his attention forward, though his focus seemed less fixed, more aware, as if the scene in front of him had expanded beyond the boundaries he first assumed. Naomi finally spoke again, her voice as calm as it had been from the beginning, but carrying a quiet clarity that seemed to settle into the air rather than pass through it. "You are going to want to listen carefully when the next call comes in," she said, not as a warning, not as a threat, just as a statement, simple and direct. The officer did not respond right away. He looked at her for a second longer than necessary, then glanced at the radio again, as if weighing whether to dismiss her words or hold on to them. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the gas station, a low rumble began to form, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the normal sounds of the road, but steady, growing, and moving closer. It was not loud enough to draw immediate attention, but it was there, consistent, deliberate, and for reasons none of them could yet explain, it felt like it belonged to this moment. Naomi did not turn toward it. She did not react outwardly at all. But there was a subtle shift in the way she stood, something grounding, something final, as if whatever was coming was not a surprise to her, only a matter of time, and the space between the officers and her no longer felt like control, but like distance waiting to be closed by something none of them had fully understood yet. That sound, the younger officer said under his breath, almost to himself, his head turning slightly toward the road beyond the gas station, where the low rumble had grown just enough to separate itself from the background noise, steady and controlled, not like traffic, not like anything casual passing through. The first officer did not respond immediately, but his posture tightened again, his shoulders drawing back a fraction as his attention shifted outward, his instincts now pulling in a direction he had not anticipated when this stop began. Naomi remained still, her gaze forward, her expression unchanged, but the air around her felt different now, not because she had moved, but because everything else had begun to adjust around her. The rumble deepened, not louder in volume, but clearer in presence, like something approaching with intention rather than coincidence. A pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the road, then another, then a third, all moving in a straight line, evenly spaced, their beams cutting through the damp night with precision. The younger officer straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. "Sir," he said quietly, this time not questioning, just informing, "we have incoming vehicles." The first officer followed his line of sight, and for a brief moment, the confidence that had anchored him earlier seemed to slip, replaced by something more cautious, more aware. The radio crackled again, sharper than before, the voice on the other end now unmistakably firm. "Unit 12, confirm you are maintaining position. Do not escalate. Repeat, do not escalate." The instruction landed differently this time, not as routine guidance, but as a boundary being drawn. The officer pressed the button, his response immediate, but measured. "Maintaining position," he said, though his eyes remained fixed on the approaching lights. Naomi exhaled softly, the sound barely audible, her shoulders relaxing just enough to signal that whatever was unfolding had moved beyond uncertainty for her. The vehicles slowed as they entered the lot, not abruptly, not with flashing lights or noise, just a controlled deceleration that felt deliberate, calculated. Dark SUVs, clean lines, unmarked, their windows tinted, their presence quiet but unmistakable. They pulled in with precision, positioning themselves at the edge of the scene without crowding it, without disrupting the space more than necessary, and yet everything shifted the moment they stopped. The bystanders near the convenience store fell silent, their attention fully captured now, phones lowered slightly as curiosity turned into something closer to recognition, even if they could not yet name it. The younger officer took a half step back, not retreating, just creating space, his eyes moving from the vehicles to Naomi, then back again, the connection forming in his mind before he fully understood it. The first officer remained where he was, but his stance had changed, no longer squared in confrontation, but angled slightly, as if preparing to receive rather than control. The engine of the lead SUV idled for a second longer than expected, then shut off, the sudden quiet amplifying the hum of the gas station lights above them. The driver's side door opened smoothly, not rushed, not hesitant, and a man stepped out, his posture straight, his movements efficient, every detail of his presence suggesting discipline without needing to announce it. He did not raise his voice. He did not hurry. He simply walked forward, each step measured, his attention focused on the center of the scene where Naomi stood. The officers watched him approach, their expressions shifting from authority to assessment, trying to place him, to understand what had just entered their jurisdiction. Naomi turned her head slightly for the first time since the vehicles arrived, her eyes meeting the man's for a brief second, and in that glance, there was no surprise, no relief, just recognition, quiet and complete. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from Naomi to the officers, not confrontational, but direct, the kind of look that expected clarity without needing to demand it. "Evening," he said calmly, his voice steady, carrying just enough weight to settle into the space without raising it. The first officer nodded once, instinctively, his reply coming a fraction slower than it would have minutes ago. "Evening," he said, his tone measured, cautious. A pause followed, brief but loaded, as if both sides understood that something had shifted, even if it had not yet been spoken aloud. The man's eyes returned to Naomi, taking in her posture, her stillness, the faint mark where the cool night air had brushed against her skin, and then back to the officer. "We received a call," he said simply. Not an explanation, not a question, just a statement that carried more meaning than the words themselves. The officer's hand hovered near his radio again, not pressing it this time, just resting there, as if unsure whether he still needed it. "We are verifying a report," he replied, though the firmness in his voice had softened, the certainty replaced by something more measured. Naomi spoke then, her voice calm, unchanged, cutting gently through the space between them. "It is already verified," she said, not looking at the officer, but at the man who had arrived. The younger officer glanced at his partner, then back at the man, then at Naomi, the pieces aligning in his mind with a quiet realization that settled deeper than any instruction he had received over the radio. And in that moment, the distance between assumption and truth began to close, not with force, not with volume, but with something far more precise, something that had been moving toward them long before the first set of lights ever appeared. The man's presence settled into the space like something official without needing to announce itself, and the silence that followed his last words felt different now, not uncertain, but expectant, as if everyone standing there understood that the next few seconds would redefine everything that had come before. The first officer shifted his weight slightly, his hand finally lowering from the radio, though it did not move far, hovering near his side, as if he still needed the reassurance of it. "Sir," he began, his voice more measured now, less rigid. "We received a report tied to this vehicle, and we are in the process of verifying ownership." The man listened without interrupting, his expression calm, composed, the kind of stillness that did not come from passivity, but from certainty. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with a controlled, deliberate motion, retrieving a slim identification wallet. He opened it just enough to present, not pushing it forward, not demanding attention, simply placing it within view. The officer leaned slightly to read it, and in that brief moment, something in his posture changed completely, not dramatically, but unmistakably, the shift from assumption to recognition happening in real time. The younger officer caught it too, his eyes widening just a fraction before he quickly composed himself, though the realization had already settled in. The man closed the wallet and returned it to his jacket, his movements as precise as before. "We are here to ensure there are no further misunderstandings," he said, his tone even, not accusatory, not defensive, just clear. Naomi remained still, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged, though the air around her now felt anchored, as if the ground beneath her had solidified in a way it had not before. The first officer cleared his throat lightly, a subtle sound, but one that carried the weight of recalibration. "Understood," he replied, his voice quieter, more controlled, the earlier edge gone. He glanced briefly at Naomi, then back at the man, as if reassessing everything he had assumed only minutes ago. The younger officer stepped back another half step, creating more space without being told, his posture no longer assertive, but attentive. The radio crackled once more, but this time the officer did not reach for it immediately. He let it speak into the air, the voice on the other end now calm, confirming, final. "Unit 12, federal registration confirmed. No further action required. Stand down." The words settled over the scene like a final piece falling into place. No urgency, no confusion, just clarity. The officer pressed the button slowly, his response quieter than before. "Copy that," he said. Naomi exhaled softly, her shoulders lowering just slightly, though Though her posture remained composed, her presence steady, unchanged by the shift around her. The first officer turned fully toward her now, his expression no longer fixed in authority, but searching for the right place to stand in a moment that had moved beyond his control. "Ma'am," he began, then paused, the word itself feeling different now, heavier, more deliberate. He glanced briefly at the man beside him, then back at Naomi. "It appears there has been an error." Naomi met his gaze, her eyes calm, not sharp, not cold, just clear. She did not rush to respond. She did not fill the silence. She let it exist, letting the weight of his words settle before she spoke. "It happens," she said quietly, her voice steady, though the simplicity of it carried more meaning than any longer explanation could have. The younger officer looked down briefly, then back up, his expression reflecting something closer to understanding now, something that had not been there at the start. The man who had arrived glanced once more at Naomi, a brief exchange of recognition passing between them, then shifted his attention back to the officers. "We will take it from here," he said, not dismissive, not forceful, just final in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The first officer nodded again, this time more quickly, stepping slightly to the side, clearing the space without being asked. The red and blue lights continued to flash, but they felt different now, less dominant, less defining, like echoes of a moment that had already passed. Naomi adjusted her hands gently, the faint movement of her sleeve catching the light again, and for the first time, she took a small step forward, not away, not toward anyone in particular, just forward, as if reclaiming the space that had been taken from her without ever having been given. The damp pavement reflected her movement, the light shifting beneath her feet as she moved, and the air seemed to settle with her, quieter, steadier. The first officer watched her for a moment, then lowered his gaze slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, the kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. And in that quiet, under the soft hum of the lights and the fading echo of the radio, the imbalance that had defined the beginning of the night no longer held the same shape, replaced instead by something more precise, something that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. Naomi's step forward was small, almost unnoticeable to anyone not watching closely, but it changed the balance of the moment in a way nothing else had. Her presence no longer contained within the invisible boundary that had been placed around her earlier, but moving through it with quiet certainty. The man beside her shifted slightly as well, not stepping ahead of her, not guiding, just aligning, as if his role was not to lead, but to ensure nothing else interrupted what had already been set in motion. The first officer remained still for a second longer than necessary, his eyes following Naomi's movement. Then he exhaled, a slow release that seemed to carry more than just breath, something heavier, something unspoken. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice softer now, more deliberate, "we apologize for the inconvenience." The words came carefully, measured, as if he were placing each one with intention rather than habit. Naomi paused, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge him over her shoulder, her expression calm, her gaze steady. She did not immediately accept or reject the apology. She let it exist, giving it the space it needed to be heard without rushing to respond. The younger officer watched the exchange closely, his posture no longer guarded, but attentive in a different way, as if he were learning something he had not expected to encounter tonight. Naomi's voice, when it came, was quiet, but clear. "It was not an inconvenience," she said, the words landing gently but carrying a weight that shifted the air again. The first officer's brow tightened slightly, not in defense, but in recognition, as if he understood that what had happened could not be reduced to something so small. The man beside Naomi glanced at her briefly, then at the officers, his expression unchanged, but his presence still anchoring the moment. "Documentation has been verified," he added calmly, not as a correction, but as a reinforcement, a closing statement that left no ambiguity. The first officer nodded again, more firmly this time, stepping another half step back, clearing the path entirely now, not out of instruction, but out of understanding. The red and blue lights continued to flash behind him, but they no longer defined the scene, their rhythm now just a background to something quieter, more precise. Naomi turned fully this time, facing the officers, her posture still composed, her hands resting naturally at her sides. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The hum of the overhead lights filled the space again, along with the distant sound of a car passing on the highway, its tires cutting through the wet pavement in a steady, fading rhythm. Naomi looked at the first officer, not with anger, not with judgment, but with a clarity that made it difficult to look away. "You did not see me," she said, her voice even, her tone steady. "You saw a report." The words were simple, but they settled deeply, not as an accusation, but as something harder to dismiss, something that lingered beyond the moment itself. The officer did not respond right away. He held her gaze for a second, then lowered his eyes slightly, the acknowledgement silent but clear. The younger officer shifted again, his expression thoughtful now, his earlier uncertainty replaced by something more grounded, something closer to awareness. Naomi let the silence stretch for a moment longer, then nodded once, a small gesture that did not signal agreement or forgiveness, just closure. She turned back toward her car, her steps measured, unhurried, each one deliberate as she moved across the damp pavement. The reflection of the lights followed her briefly, then faded as she passed beyond their strongest reach. The man walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, maintaining that same quiet alignment, his presence steady but unobtrusive. As they reached the car, Naomi paused for a second, her hand resting lightly on the door handle, the cool metal grounding beneath her fingers. She glanced once more at the officers, not lingering, just enough to acknowledge that the moment had ended, then opened the door and stepped inside. The interior light flickered on briefly, illuminating the familiar space, the dashboard, the steering wheel, everything exactly where it had been before, unchanged despite everything that had happened outside. The man remained just outside the door, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if ensuring that nothing else would interfere. The first officer watched from a distance now, his stance no longer commanding, but reflective, his hands resting at his sides, the radio quiet against his shoulder. The younger officer stood beside him, his gaze following Naomi as she settled back into her seat, his expression thoughtful, the earlier tension replaced by something quieter, something that would likely stay with him longer than the flashing lights ever could. Naomi closed the door gently, the soft click sealing the space around her, and for a brief moment, she sat still, her hands returning to the steering wheel, her breathing steady, her reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the lights continued to pulse, but they felt distant now, no longer defining her, no longer containing her. And as the engine started with a low, familiar hum, the night seemed to shift once more, not dramatically, but enough to mark the difference between what had been assumed and what had finally been seen. The engine's low hum settled into a steady rhythm beneath Naomi's hands, the vibration familiar, grounding, like something that belonged to her again after being briefly taken out of reach. And for a moment she did not move, her fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, her gaze forward through the windshield where the faint reflection of the gas station lights shimmered across the glass. Outside, the man remained near the driver's side door, not watching her directly, but aware of her, his posture relaxed yet precise, as if his presence was no longer about intervention, but about ensuring the space remained undisturbed as it returned to normal. The first officer shifted his stance again, the earlier tension replaced by something quieter, something that did not push forward but lingered, his eyes moving briefly from Naomi's car to the dark SUVs still idling at the edge of the lot, then back again, as if trying to reconcile the sequence of events with the version of reality he had carried into this moment. The younger officer stood beside him, his gaze fixed on the car, not out of suspicion anymore, but out of reflection, his shoulders no longer squared, his posture softened in a way that suggested the experience had settled deeper than procedure. Naomi adjusted her grip slightly, her thumb brushing along the edge of the wheel, a small, absent motion. Then she reached for the control panel and dimmed the interior light, allowing the cabin to return to its usual quiet darkness, where only the dashboard glow remained, soft and steady. She took a slow breath, the kind that did not rush to leave, but stayed just long enough to steady everything inside her. And as she exhaled, her shoulders lowered a fraction more, not from relief, but from release, like something she had carried without noticing had finally been set down. Outside, One of the SUV doors opened briefly, then closed again, a subtle movement that did not interrupt the stillness but reminded everyone that the presence there was intentional, coordinated, and complete. The man stepped back half a pace from Naomi's door, not signaling departure, just creating space, his attention shifting momentarily toward the officers, then back to the car, his expression unchanged, composed, as if this outcome had been expected long before anyone else realized it. Naomi glanced once toward the side mirror, catching the reflection of the officers standing beneath the harsh white lights, their figures now smaller, less defined, no longer occupying the center of the moment, and for a brief second, her eyes lingered there, not in judgment, not in triumph, just acknowledgement, quiet and complete. She turned her gaze forward again, her foot pressing gently on the brake as she shifted the gear into drive, the movement smooth, unhurried, the kind that did not need to prove anything. The car rolled forward slowly, the tires moving across the damp pavement with a soft, controlled sound, and as she passed beneath the canopy, the overhead lights traced across the hood, then across the windshield, then across her face for a brief second before sliding away behind her. The man watched her go, his posture still, his hands resting loosely at his sides, and as the car moved past the line of SUVs, one of the drivers inside gave a small nod, barely visible, a gesture that did not need to be returned to be understood. Naomi continued toward the exit of the lot, the red and blue lights fading in her rearview mirror, their reflection growing smaller with each passing second, until they became nothing more than faint pulses of color against the dark. She did not accelerate quickly. She did not rush. She drove the way she had arrived, steady, measured, her attention forward, her hands firm but relaxed on the wheel. Behind her, the first officer exhaled again, this time longer, his shoulders lowering as the weight of the moment settled into something he would not easily forget. He looked down briefly, then back up at the empty space where the car had been, the absence itself now louder than the presence had been before. The younger officer spoke quietly, almost to himself. She never argued. The words hung in the air, simple, but heavy with meaning. The first officer did not answer immediately. He watched the road where Naomi's car had disappeared, then nodded once, slowly. She did not have to, he said, his voice low, not defensive, not dismissive, just reflective. The hum of the gas station returned to its usual rhythm, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the drip of water from the canopy resuming its steady pattern, and the bystanders near the store began to move again, their attention shifting back to their own lives, though the quiet weight of what they had witnessed lingered just beneath the surface. The SUVs remained for a moment longer, engines idling. Then one by one, they began to pull away, not in a rush, not with any display, just a quiet departure that matched their arrival, controlled and precise. The man took one last look toward the road, then turned, walking back toward the lead vehicle, his steps measured, his presence fading into the night as seamlessly as it had entered. And as Naomi merged onto the main road, the city lights stretching out ahead of her, the moment at the gas station settled behind her, not erased, not forgotten, but placed exactly where it belonged, a quiet line between what had been assumed and what had finally been understood. The road stretched out ahead of Naomi in long, quiet lines, the city lights reflecting faintly across the windshield as she merged into the flow of traffic, her speed steady, matching the rhythm around her without forcing it, without lagging behind, just present within it. The hum of the engine settled deeper now, smoother, familiar, the kind of sound that did not demand attention but filled the space with a sense of continuity, like something that had always been there waiting for her to return. Her hands remained at 10 and 2, relaxed but precise, her fingers adjusting slightly as the road curved, the motion instinctive, controlled, the way someone drives when they are not thinking about driving, but simply moving forward. The reflection of the gas station lights had disappeared completely from her rearview mirror now, replaced by the steady stream of headlights behind her, each one separate, each one passing through its own moment without touching hers. Naomi exhaled slowly, the breath deeper this time, not from tension, but from release, and as it left her, her shoulders softened just enough to mark the difference between before and now. The radio in her car remained off, the silence inside the cabin intentional, unbroken, allowing her thoughts to settle without interruption. Outside, the world continued as it always had. Cars passing, signals changing, tires gliding across damp pavement, the quiet rhythm of a city that did not stop for any single moment, no matter how significant it might have felt inside it. Naomi's gaze remained forward, but her eyes softened slightly, not in distraction, but in reflection, as if she were replaying the scene not for what had happened, but for what had been revealed. She adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, not because it was out of place, but because the motion gave her a brief shift in perspective, the angle catching a different slice of the road behind her, the lights rearranging themselves in a subtle pattern before settling again. Her thumb brushed lightly against the edge of the steering wheel, the same small motion from earlier, now slower, more deliberate, like a quiet habit grounding her in the present. A traffic light ahead turned from green to yellow, then to red, and she eased her foot onto the brake, the car slowing smoothly until it came to a gentle stop at the line, the engine idling beneath her with a low, steady vibration. To her right, another car pulled up, a driver glancing over briefly before looking away, unaware, uninterested, just another passing moment in a night full of them. Naomi did not look back. She did not check the mirror again. She simply waited, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, her breathing even, her posture unchanged. The red light cast a faint glow across the hood of her car, reflecting back onto the windshield in a soft wash of color that shifted slightly as the droplets of water on the glass caught and bent the light. Somewhere in the distance, a siren sounded, faint and far away, not connected to her, not connected to this moment, just part of the city's constant background. Naomi's eyes lifted slightly, focusing on the intersection ahead, the empty cross street stretching left and right, quiet for now, waiting for movement. The light changed again, from red to green, and she pressed gently on the accelerator, the car moving forward with the same measured control, the transition smooth, unhurried. As she crossed the intersection, the world opened up again, the road ahead clear, the lights spaced out in long intervals that gave the night a sense of depth, of distance, of continuation. Naomi's jaw relaxed slightly, the last trace of tension leaving her face, not because the moment had been easy, but because it had passed, and she had remained exactly who she was within it. The lines of the road guided her forward, steady and consistent, and she followed them without hesitation, without second-guessing, just moving, just continuing. In the quiet of the car, with only the low hum of the engine and the soft sound of tires against wet asphalt, there was a stillness that did not feel empty, but complete, like something had settled into place without needing to be spoken. Naomi did not reach for her phone. She did not turn on the radio. She did not fill the silence with anything unnecessary. She let it exist, let it stretch, let it hold the space that the moment behind her had left. And as the city lights continued to pass, one by one, reflecting briefly across the glass before fading into the dark, she drove on, not faster, not slower, just steady, her presence unchanged, her direction clear, the road unfolding ahead exactly as it should. The road ahead stretched wider now as Naomi moved farther from the tighter grid of the city, the streetlights, spacing out into longer intervals, each one casting a pool of pale light that she passed through for only a second before returning to the soft darkness in between, and the rhythm of it settled into something almost meditative, light then shadow, steady and unbroken. Her hands remained steady on the wheel, her posture unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in the way she carried herself now, not visible in any dramatic movement, just in the quiet absence of tension that had once lived in the edges of her shoulders and jaw. The car's interior held that same calm, the dashboard glowing faintly, the speedometer hovering at a consistent pace, the soft hum of the engine blending with the distant sound of tires from other vehicles sharing the road. Naomi's eyes stayed forward, but her focus seemed deeper now, not just on the road itself, but on something beneath it, something internal that had begun to settle into clarity. She passed a small roadside diner, its sign flickering slightly, the parking lot half full, people inside moving through their own quiet stories, unaware of the moment she had just left behind, unaware of how close they had been to something that would have shifted their understanding if they had only been there. Naomi did not slow down. She did not turn her head. She simply passed it, the light from the windows sliding across her windshield for a brief second before disappearing behind her. A faint vibration moved through the steering wheel as the road changed texture, the tires rolling over a patched section of asphalt, and she adjusted her grip slightly, the motion automatic, grounded, the kind of small correction that did not require thought. Her breathing remained even, slow, each inhale measured, each exhale quiet, and for a moment, she let her gaze soften just enough to allow the reflections of the lights ahead to blur slightly before sharpening again. The memory of the gas station did not replay in fragments of chaos or confusion, but in still images, precise and clear, the officer's hand tapping the glass, the reflection of red and blue across the pavement, the moment the voice on the radio shifted, the arrival of the SUVs, the silence that followed. But none of it carried the same weight it might have before. It had already been placed where it belonged, already understood, already resolved in a way that did not require her to hold on to it. Naomi's thumb traced lightly along the edge of the wheel again, the small, grounding motion returning, and she allowed a single thought to surface, not loud, not insistent, just present. Not everything that is loud is powerful, and not everything that is quiet is weak. The words did not echo. They did not demand attention. They simply settled into place, aligning with something she had known long before tonight. A car passed her on the left, its headlights sweeping briefly across her side mirror, then moving ahead, disappearing into the next stretch of darkness. Naomi maintained her speed, her lane, her direction, unaffected by the movement around her, her focus steady, her presence unchanged. The road curved gently to the right, and she followed it without hesitation, the motion smooth, continuous, the city now fading behind her into a distant glow that no longer defined her path. Ahead, the horizon opened slightly, the outline of low buildings and quiet neighborhoods beginning to replace the denser structures of the city center, and the air felt different, cooler, more open, the kind of shift that could not be measured but could be felt. Naomi adjusted the temperature control slightly, the soft click of the dial barely audible, and a gentle flow of air moved through the cabin, brushing lightly against her hands and face. She blinked once, slowly, her eyes refocusing on the road as another set of lights appeared in the distance, approaching from the opposite direction, then passing by in a quiet exchange that lasted no more than a second. The night continued, uninterrupted, indifferent to what had happened earlier, and yet something within it had changed for her, something subtle but permanent. Naomi did not reach for her phone. She did not speak. She did not break the silence that had settled into the space around her. She allowed it to remain, to hold everything that had been said and everything that had not, to carry the weight of the moment without needing to name it. And as the miles passed beneath her, each one marked by the steady roll of tires against asphalt, she moved forward not as someone leaving something behind, but as someone who had already carried it through and placed it exactly where it belonged, her direction unchanged, her pace steady, her presence quiet but undeniable, like the road itself stretching endlessly ahead. The road narrowed slightly as Naomi turned off the main highway, the wide lanes giving way to a quieter street lined with low trees whose branches swayed gently in the night air, their shadows stretching across the pavement in soft, uneven patterns that moved with the passing of each streetlight. Her speed adjusted naturally, not abruptly, just easing into the slower rhythm of the neighborhood, her foot lifting slightly from the accelerator as the car responded with a smooth, controlled glide. The hum of the engine softened, settling into a quieter tone that matched the stillness around her, and for a moment, it felt as if the world itself had lowered its voice. Naomi's eyes remained forward, but there was a new layer of awareness in her gaze now, not scanning for danger, not anticipating interruption, just observing, present in the details that had once been background but now felt more defined. A porch light flickered on in the distance, illuminating the outline of a small house, the glow warm and steady against the cool darkness of the street. A dog barked faintly somewhere beyond the row of trees, then fell silent again. The sound carried briefly on the air before disappearing completely. Naomi adjusted her hands on the wheel, her fingers loosening slightly, the tension that had once lived in them now replaced by something more fluid, more at ease. She passed a parked car on the right, its windows fogged slightly from the cool air, and for a brief second, the reflection of her headlights traced across its surface, then faded as she moved beyond it. The memory of the earlier moment did not press against her anymore, did not demand to be revisited, but it lingered in a different way, quieter, more integrated, like something that had become part of the fabric of the night rather than a disruption within it. Naomi's breathing remained steady, her chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm, and she allowed herself a brief glance at the dashboard clock, now reading 9:34 p.m., the numbers glowing softly in the dim light. Time had moved forward without hesitation, without pause, carrying everything with it whether it was acknowledged or not. She turned onto another street, the motion smooth, her hands guiding the wheel with the same quiet precision, and the environment shifted again, the houses spaced farther apart now, the streetlights fewer, the darkness deeper between them. The tires rolled over a slight dip in the road, the car responding with a gentle rise and fall that barely disturbed the stillness inside the cabin. Naomi's thumb brushed the steering wheel once more, that same small, grounding motion returning, and for a moment, her lips pressed together lightly, not in tension, but in thought, as if something unspoken had reached its final shape within her. She did not need to name it. She did not need to explain it. It was simply there, settled, complete. Ahead, her street came into view, the familiar curve, the subtle incline that she had driven countless times before, and as she approached it, her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, not from caution, but from recognition, the body responding to something known, something consistent. She slowed slightly, her foot easing onto the brake, the car gliding into the turn with a smooth, practiced motion, the headlights sweeping across the front yards of quiet homes, illuminating mailboxes, driveways, and the occasional shadow of a tree before settling back onto the road ahead. The air felt cooler here, more still, the kind of quiet that belonged to places where the day had fully ended and the night had taken its place without interruption. Naomi's eyes softened again, not from fatigue, but from the absence of urgency, the absence of anything pressing against her from the outside. She was simply moving forward, exactly as she had been before, but now with something added, something that had not changed her direction, but had clarified it. As she approached her driveway, she slowed further, the car coming to a gentle stop before turning in, the gravel beneath the tires producing a soft, familiar crunch that marked the transition from public space to private ground. The headlights illuminated the front of the house, the porch light already on, casting a warm, steady glow across the entrance, and for a brief moment, Naomi paused, her hands still on the wheel, her gaze resting on the door ahead. The engine idled quietly, the sound low and consistent, and she took one more slow breath, deeper this time, letting it settle fully before releasing it. Outside, the night remained still, unchanged, the same quiet that had been there long before she arrived and would remain long after. Naomi reached forward and turned the key, the engine cutting off smoothly, the sudden silence filling the space around her, not empty, but complete. Her hands rested on the wheel for 1 second longer. Then she let them fall gently to her lap, the movement unhurried, natural. She did not rush to open the door. She did not move immediately. She simply sat there, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space that now belonged entirely to her again, and in that moment, nothing needed to be said, nothing needed to be proven, nothing needed to be resolved. Everything already had been. The quiet inside the car lingered even after the engine had gone still, the absence of its hum leaving behind a deeper kind of silence, one that felt heavier but not uncomfortable, like the air itself had settled into place around Naomi rather than pressing against her. Her hands rested loosely in her lap now, fingers relaxed, no longer holding onto anything, and for a moment she did not move, her gaze still fixed on the front door of the house, where the porch light cast a steady glow across the steps. The light did not flicker. It did not waver. It simply stayed, constant and warm, a quiet contrast to the sharp, shifting lights she had stood under earlier in the night. Naomi inhaled slowly, the breath filling her chest fully this time, and as she exhaled, Her shoulders dropped just a fraction more, the final layer of tension leaving her body without resistance. Outside, the night carried on in its own rhythm, a distant breeze moving through the trees, the faint rustle of leaves brushing against one another, and somewhere down the street, a car door closed softly, followed by footsteps that faded quickly into the distance. None of it demanded her attention. None of it disrupted the stillness she now sat within. Naomi reached forward and gently pushed the door open, the hinge releasing with a soft, familiar creak that sounded louder in the quiet than it normally would. And as she stepped out, the cool air met her skin with a light, steady touch. Her feet pressed into the gravel of the driveway, the small stones shifting beneath her weight with a muted crunch that grounded her fully in the moment. She closed the door behind her without force, the soft click sealing the space she had just left, and for a brief second, she rested her hand on the roof of the car, the metal still slightly warm beneath her palm. The warmth lingered there, subtle but present, a quiet reminder of motion now stilled. Naomi lifted her gaze toward the house again, her eyes tracing the outline of the porch, the door, the light above it, each detail familiar, each one unchanged. She began to walk, her steps unhurried, measured, the sound of gravel giving way to the softer texture of the walkway as she approached the front steps. The porch light cast a gentle shadow behind her, stretching along the ground, moving with her, then settling as she reached the base of the steps. She paused there for a moment, not because she needed to, but because the stillness invited it, her hand resting lightly on the railing as she looked toward the door. There was no urgency in her movement, no need to rush inside. She simply stood, breathing evenly, allowing the quiet to fully settle around her. The memory of the night no longer felt like something behind her or something ahead of her. It felt present, but contained, placed exactly where it belonged, no longer demanding to be understood because it already had been. Naomi stepped up onto the porch, the wood beneath her feet solid and steady, the faint creak of it echoing softly in the night. She reached for the door handle, her fingers wrapping around it with a familiarity that did not need to be thought about, and as she turned it, the door opened smoothly, the warm air from inside meeting the cooler air outside in a brief, gentle exchange. The interior lights spilled outward, illuminating the space just beyond the threshold, and for a moment, Naomi remained there, standing between the two, not divided, not uncertain, just present in both. She stepped inside, her movement fluid, natural, and as the door closed behind her, the outside world settled back into its quiet rhythm without interruption. Inside, the house held its own stillness, a different kind, softer, enclosed, the faint hum of electricity in the walls, the subtle warmth of the space wrapping around her without effort. Naomi paused just inside the entryway, her hand resting briefly against the door as if marking the transition, then she let it fall gently to her side. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, not searching, just observing, taking in the familiar arrangement of furniture, the quiet order of everything in its place. There was no need to adjust anything, no need to fix or change. Everything already was. Naomi took a few steps forward, her shoes making a soft sound against the floor, then stopping as she reached the center of the room. She stood there for a moment, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, her presence fully settled. The night outside continued without her, the world moving on as it always did, but inside, there was a stillness that belonged entirely to her, uninterrupted, complete. And in that stillness, there was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to carry, only the quiet understanding that what had happened did not change who she was, it revealed it. And now, in the soft, steady light of her own space, that truth remained, clear and unmoved. The quiet inside the house settled around Naomi like something familiar, not heavy, not distant, but present in a way that did not need to be acknowledged to be understood, and for a moment she remained where she stood, her gaze moving slowly across the room, not searching, not analyzing, just observing the stillness that now belonged entirely to her. The soft glow from the lamp in the corner cast a warm light across the floor, stretching gently toward her feet, and as she took a step forward, the shadow behind her shifted slightly, then settled again, mirroring her movement without effort. Naomi reached toward the small table near the entryway and placed her keys down, the faint sound of metal against wood echoing softly in the quiet space. A simple, ordinary sound that carried more weight than it normally would, marking the return to something steady, something unchanged. She slipped off her jacket, the fabric brushing lightly against her arms, and draped it over the back of a chair with a motion that felt automatic, practiced, the kind of movement shaped by routine rather than thought. For a brief second, her hand lingered on the chair, her fingers resting against the smooth surface, and she exhaled slowly, the breath deeper now, more complete, as if the last trace of the night had finally left her body. The house remained still, the faint hum of electricity in the walls barely noticeable, the kind of background presence that only became clear when everything else had quieted. Naomi moved further into the room, her steps soft against the floor, each one deliberate but unhurried, her posture relaxed in a way that did not signal exhaustion, but release. She paused near the window, her gaze shifting outward for a moment, catching the faint outline of the street beyond, the porch light reflecting softly against the glass, and the distant shape of a passing car moving quietly through the neighborhood without drawing attention to itself. She did not focus on it. She let it pass. Turning slightly, she reached toward the lamp and adjusted the brightness, the light softening just enough to change the tone of the room, not dim, not dark, but calmer, more aligned with the quiet that had settled inside her. Naomi walked toward the kitchen, her movements fluid, natural, and as she reached the counter, she rested her hands lightly against its surface, the cool texture grounding beneath her palms. She filled a glass with water, the sound of it pouring steady and clear, and for a moment she simply listened, the simplicity of it anchoring her in the present in a way nothing else needed to. She lifted the glass and took a slow sip, the coolness settling into her, refreshing, steady, and when she placed it back down, the faint ring it left on the surface of the counter marked the moment without interrupting it. Naomi leaned slightly against the counter, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze lowered for a second, not in thought, but in stillness, allowing everything that had been to settle fully into what was now. There was no rush to move on, no urgency to fill the space. The quiet held everything without needing explanation. After a moment, she straightened and moved toward the hallway, her steps measured, the light from the living room following her part of the way before fading as she moved deeper into the house. The air shifted slightly, cooler, more enclosed, and she reached for the light switch, turning it on with a soft click that illuminated the space ahead in a gentle, even glow. Naomi paused again, her hand resting briefly against the wall, her breathing steady, her presence fully grounded in the moment. The events of the night did not press against her. They did not demand revisiting. They existed, but they no longer carried weight in the way they might have before. They had already found their place, already been understood in a way that did not require repetition. Naomi moved forward again, her steps quiet, and as she reached the end of the hallway, she stopped once more, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, the kind that comes when everything inside aligns with everything outside. Her shoulders lifted slightly with a slow inhale, then lowered as she exhaled, the motion smooth, unforced. There was nothing left to resolve, nothing left to defend, only the quiet presence of herself within her own space, steady and unchanged. And in that stillness, in that soft, steady light, the night did not linger as something unfinished, but as something complete, something that had passed through without altering what had always been there, waiting quietly to be seen. The hallway light remained on behind Naomi, casting a soft glow that stretched just far enough to meet the dimmer light of the room ahead, the two blending quietly at the threshold without competing, without one overpowering the other. And for a moment she stood there again, not because she needed to stop, but because the stillness invited her to feel it fully, to recognize it without naming it. Her hand brushed lightly along the wall as she stepped forward, the texture familiar beneath her fingertips, grounding in a way that did not require attention, and as she moved into the room, the air seemed to settle even deeper, as if the house itself understood that nothing more needed to be carried inside. Naomi paused near the edge of the bed, her gaze lowering briefly, not searching, not avoiding, just acknowledging the space in front of her, and she reached to turn on the small bedside lamp. The soft click followed by a gentle wash of warm light that filled the room without sharpness, without intrusion. She sat down slowly, the mattress giving slightly beneath her weight, the movement quiet, controlled, and for a moment her hands rested on her knees, fingers relaxed, her posture neither rigid nor collapsed, simply present. The night outside remained unchanged, a distant quiet pressing softly against the windows, the occasional movement of air through the trees barely audible, and somewhere far off, a car passed, its sound fading quickly into the distance. As if it had never been there at all. Naomi inhaled deeply, her chest rising in a steady, unbroken motion, and as she exhaled, her shoulders lowered fully, the last trace of tension dissolving without resistance, without effort. She reached up and gently removed the watch from her wrist, the faint click of the clasp opening marking a small, ordinary action that now carried a different kind of meaning, and she placed it carefully on the bedside table, the face catching the light for a brief second before settling into stillness. Her wrist, now bare, rested lightly against her leg, the absence of pressure subtle but noticeable, like something that had been there long enough to be forgotten until it was gone. Naomi leaned back slightly, her hands moving to rest beside her, her gaze lifting toward the ceiling, not focused on anything in particular, just allowing her eyes to settle, to soften, to release. The events of the night did not return as fragments or echoes. They did not demand attention or interpretation. They existed, but they had already been placed, already been understood, already been carried through. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, not to shut anything out, but to feel the quiet fully, to let it fill the space inside her without interruption. When she opened them again, nothing had changed, and yet everything had settled into a clarity that did not need explanation. Naomi shifted slightly, her feet resting flat against the floor, her hands pressing gently against the edge of the bed as she stood again, the movement smooth, unforced. She walked toward the window, her steps soft, the light from the lamp following her part of the way before fading at the edges, and she reached out to adjust the curtain just slightly, allowing a narrow view of the street outside. The porch light cast a steady glow across the front yard, illuminating the quiet space where her car now rested, still, unchanged, exactly where it belonged. Naomi looked at it for a moment, not with attachment, not with relief, just recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of the path that had led her back here. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, overlapping with the view outside, her features calm, her gaze steady, and for a second, the two images existed together, neither stronger than the other, simply aligned. She let the curtain fall back into place, the fabric settling softly, and turned away from the window, the room returning fully to its warm, enclosed stillness. Naomi moved back toward the bed, her steps measured, and as she reached the lamp, she paused, her hand hovering just above the switch for a second before she pressed it, the light dimming instantly, the room slipping into a softer darkness where only the faint outline of objects remained. She lay down slowly, the mattress adjusting beneath her, the fabric cool against her skin, and she pulled the blanket lightly over herself, the motion gentle, unhurried. Her head rested against the pillow, her breathing steady, her body fully at ease, and for a moment she simply lay there, eyes open, looking into the quiet darkness that now held the room. There was no tension left, no question left unanswered, only the soft rhythm of her breath and the quiet understanding that what had been revealed tonight did not need to be spoken to remain true. Naomi closed her eyes once more, the darkness settling completely, and in that stillness, in that silence, the world did not need to change, because she had not changed, she had only been seen, and that was enough.